everyone! Welcome back to the Settings Series tutorial of Wings Engine Water. In the previous two classes, we talked about the setting of our plain water, the setting of a water effect, and how to bind real data. Today, we will take a look at the second type of water in the classic of mountains and
Which
seas,
is
what we call the waveform simulation water. In fact, waveform simulation water and plain water, there are many similarities. For example, if we want to set such a depth, using data binding, they are the same. So I want to teach you separately. I won't teach you the data settings in a separate class. You can refer to the plain water and the wave simulation water actually uses a plane. The only difference is that this plane has a very large number of vertices. Okay, let's first take a look at our current, this plane of water. Let's cut the entire scene into a wireframe. You can see that this plane is very simple. It only has 4 vertices, 1 square, and then 2 triangular faces. It's a very, very simple plane. For this kind of plane, its advantage is that it has low performance loss. We only have so many vertices in total, and Anna is in. It puts very little pressure on our GPU. But our wave simulation water, because it needs every vertex to raise or lower each vertex. So for it needs more densely distributed vertices. First, we remove the plane first. Let's take a look at our waveform. Waveform simulation of water. How to set the water wave simulation. The settings of the waveform to simulate water is actually easier than the plain water. First, we click on the surface. You can see there are water bodies here. Inside the water body, there are several different water bodies. The settings for wave simulation of water are actually very similar. The only difference is that their generation methods are different. For example, our lake is drawn by clicking dots in a circle, while our ocean is a pure plane. Well, these several types, I'll leave them for you to try. Today, let's look at the simplest ocean. Okay, let's move to the screen. Okay. Here, let me explain something. Why I didn't appear. Because I turned off the overall visibility switch. The overall visibility switch. Let's add it again. because I'm turning it on now. Let's add it again, because I showed you the diving simulation before. We need to hide it. Okay, let's add it again. Add the terrain and click on the ocean, okay? Okay, a little better. Then the ocean will appear. It's actually a very simple process. It's easier than setting the water material. It's actually simpler. Everyone, this. You can rotate it appropriately. Our rotation is with adsorption, so some places may feel a little difficult to pull. It's actually an integer adsorption, such as 15 degrees, 30 degrees, it will be adsorbed. Okay, after we pull down this water, it will actually have all the functions. But you still need to remember the prerequisites. First of all, our scene. Okay, in the first and second classes, we talked about, firstly, in our scene, as our switch, right? And then, second, the entire sky. Select the sky texture for the environment, so that it can have reflections. If we turn off the sky, you can see that even our wave simulation, water, it will not look so good. So for water, the most important thing is to turn on reflection. Let's briefly look at this bony. The biggest difference between the body simulation, water. Firstly, on the entire shore, there will be an automatic white foam on the shore, which is to simulate this, which is the feeling of waves hitting the shore. Not only do we have it on the shore, suppose we put one in the entire picture, such as a ship. Find a transportation tool and put a ship. Okay, let's put a ship. Then slightly submerge the ship. Submerge it a little bit into the water. Okay. We can see the shore of the ship. There will be some white foam automatically hitting on the side of the ship. Let's come here and see. It's more obvious. This is the whole water. Is automatically given by the material. Of course, if you don't like this white foam on the shore, we can also turn it off directly or slowly. The intensity can be adjusted. Which can be adjusted? This one, according to your actual situation, such as this one. Like this one now. Like this. In this relatively calm, on a relatively calm lake, maybe not at the seaside, we may adjust it to be lighter. we don't need such a strong white foam on the shore. Secondly, we can see that at the tip of the waves, there will also be white foam. We call this the wave tip foam. This can also be adjusted. Well, these two are relatively simple. We can go to directly. See it and set it directly. There is another one. We can see that. The transparency of our, which can be said to be the entire. A leap in the material of the waveform simulation water. Of course, this improvement also brings a certain consumption of performance. Where is this point? First, we can see that it can. The things below can be seen through. This is the first point. Second, the thing that passes through. It will also scatter with the fluctuations of the water. We may not feel it here. If we move the house in, you might feel it more obviously. You can see that in the same water. The glass above and below the water surface. It will form an overall scattering effect. This greatly enhances the authenticity of the water. This scattering is an automatic effect. But scattering and refraction have different color settings. We'll talk about it later. Let's first take a look. We have the maximum transparency. That is, the higher the transparency. The clearer the water we can see, the clearer the water surface is, the more obvious the scattering effect will be. We can see that the water in the deep, very deep places, it will be very clear. We can also see that where we can see the water is very deep. In this way, the whole water will appear very clear. If I lower this, the whole water will appear relatively turbid. We can see the water is relatively turbid. Everyone can adjust it according to real water situation to adjust it. For example, if we go to a very beautiful beach and the water is very clear, then the transparency should be very high. Then the water. For example, if we are in a flood, the water should be very muddy. Then the transparency should be very low. Everyone can adjust it according to the real water. Since we've talked about flooding, we are still in the plain water. We only need to adjust the base color. In this case, it will be relatively more complicated. There are two colors. One is called refraction color, and the other is scattering colors. What does this mean? Refractive color is when sunlight comes in and then directly reflects into my eyes. Refraction color is when sunlight enters the water, bounces and bounces in the water, and then comes out this color. These two colors combine to form the entire color of water. When I talk about this, may be relatively theoretical. Just adjust it yourself. If the scattering colors reacts the most to this, the reaction to the ripples is the greatest. For example, if I make it yellow, we can see that in deep water, it appears very yellow. But in shallow water, it still appears a little bit blue. This is like when we are at the seaside. Like the kind of colors that are. And then light green is actually determined by the depth of the water. The depth of water is determined by the combination of scattering, different combinations of colors. Let's assume that the refraction color to yellow. As you can see, then the entire water will show a muddy state. Of course, but it's still very clear, right? Let's change it to 1. Well, we might try to imitate a color called flood. Of course, we can make it darker and adjust the color. This water is still difficult to adjust because it has two color combinations. The flood may be a little yellow. Everyone should adjust it according to real situation. Maybe this is the color of river water. Okay, this one is the entire surface of the water, which is this wave-like water simulation. We can see that waveform simulation because water it is a real waveform. The shoreline is also very uncomfortable. It will keep fluctuating. Finally, let's take a look again. There is also a wave type. There are currently two types of waveforms. One is called the Gerstner wave, and the other is called FFT, which is short for Fast Fourier Transform, which is an abbreviation for Fast Fourier Transform. Normally, we do not recommend you to turn on FFT because we need to say that. In Webble, we use Webble. We can see here is a web-based. In this Webble scene, in Webble does not support many. Some techniques to implement FFT. The most important one is computer shader. In Webble, we use a very hacky way to implement it. Therefore, its performance is relatively poor. If your picture has many performance-consuming things and your hardware is not strong enough, it is not recommended to turn on FFT. Let's take a look. The water of FFT. The whole picture is more realistic. However, we can see that because the performance directly drops to 10. So the whole picture looks choppy. So unless you have a very good graphics card. Otherwise, I don't recommend you to turn on FFT. But sometimes, if you take a look, After turning on FFT, the very realistic sea effect, it will greatly enhance the realism of the entire picture. Okay, let's still use this Gerstner. Okay, after talking about this, let's take a final look, because we said earlier that it is very similar to flat water. We can see that its up and down movements is the same as the plain water. The only difference is the number of vertices. We saw the vertex of the plane watering at the beginning. Let's take a look at this. This waveform simulates the vertex of water. We click the plus sign to go to the scene and go to the wireframe. Okay, we can see such a waveform simulates the vertex of a water tower. This grid is very, very dense. Such a dense grid in every animation. We will constantly adjust the height of the grid and the height of each vertex. Only in this way can we create a real height change. Okay, in today's class, let's take a look at to talk about the settings of wave simulation water. It is actually an upgrade. An upgraded version of flat water. The main upgrades are in two places. The first one is the entire rendering effect, which not only increases scattering, refraction, and transparency, but also the refraction. A sparkling effect. Meanwhile, we also added white foam on the shore, white foam on the tips of waves. Rendering effect of water decoration, which makes the water more realistic. Other than that, it's very similar to the flat water. It can also be lifted and lowered, the way we taught in the lessons of flat water, to raise and lower the height of the entire water. The only difference is that the vertices are very dense. Okay, that's all for today's class. Thank you all.